you check the children?
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Well, hello there, Fright fans, and welcome to the Horror Show. So very stoked to be back. I'm Jaime and Fuego, back with another solo review of something that recently hit the streamers, and this is the fourth film, courtesy of Netflix, in the Fear Street series, because, originally it was planned to be just that trilogy, and I believe myself, Marsha Parker, and Cecil reviewed all three of those original films. They had, there was 94, 78, and then there was like 1666. Yeah, it's 1666. So this one takes place in the 80s, 88, if I recall correctly. So I guess, they've hit the three crucial decades for horror at this particular point. I'm not exactly sure where they go. Maybe a modern take on this, but, R.L. Stine, when he's tried getting beyond Goosebumps, because I read the hell out of Goosebumps when I was a little kid. I was of that age, in grade school, but then as I wanted to get into, I guess, something that bridged the gap between, Goosebumps, R.L. Stine, and then going full-blown Stephen King, I was getting more into things like Kristopher Pike, for instance, Chain Letter, Last Vampire, and I can't remember which of the Fear Street books I tried when I was in, 5th or 6th grade, when I was right at that little, that little crossing into the more just full-on adult length of stuff, but I wasn't too enamored with it, and I ended up just, jumping right into Stephen King. I did not like R.L. Stine trying to write this more YA sort of stuff, as opposed to just, the scholastic, stuff for, grade school kids. And so, but I didn't mind those first three films. I thought, especially the ambitiousness of how they were all connected in various forms. 94 was still my favorite. I believe there's that really great table saw kill with Maya Hawke, if I remember correctly. That was really rad status. But, as a whole, I thought they were fine, but albeit just a slight bit forgettable. But here we are. This new Fear Street entry, Prom Queen, comes out, and as I mentioned, taking place in the 80s. I gotta say, for overall thoughts, I saw a lot of our contemporaries, shout out to, Lee from Drum Dumbs, and, a few others just absolutely trashing this movie. And am I gonna say it's good? No, it's not particularly good, but you know what? I went in with, the lowest expectations, lowered expectations, and I was amused at times by this film. I did not hate it. It had some decent gore, and it was much more successful, though, in my estimation, when it was veering a little more into the silly, as opposed to in the third act, when it tries to get a little more serious with some of its themes and whatever, without spoiling anything. But, as a whole, all of the needle drops from the 80s are nothing that, you haven't seen in some of these different things. And I'm to the point now where, the 80s flashback film, I can't remember if Totally Killer was back to the 80s, but I mean, you've done it with so many of these films at this particular point. And another horror reviewer that I like, that her channel is called Possessed by Horror, if I remember correctly. She's actually been clamoring, hey, let's give up on these 80s throwbacks and do something 90s instead. I mean, sure, I know they're starting to do it, but so yeah, as keeping that in mind, this is not going to bring pretty much anything new to the table, but you know what? For what it was, I still had enough fun. And so 1988, as I mentioned, and you have a bunch of girls that are vying for prom queen, and one of which has a father that was mysteriously killed, and so she's kind of the scorn of some of the almost plastic type, Mean Girls. They're called the Wolf Pack in this, which is just silly as hell. But so she is the scorn of her neighbor, who actually lives right across the way, who was super pretty popular girl. I mean, all the girls in this, I guess, are pretty enough, so none of them really stood out with their looks, and yet they're all competing for prom queen. And so you have kind of the more outcast girl, as I mentioned, and then you have her best friend, who is this horror girl who, possibly queer, but it doesn't really veer too much into that sub-story in this. But she's almost like the Randy type from Scream, where crazy into horror and obsessed with just gore in the entire aesthetic. And that is another thing where I know the 80s were a big decade for horror, but they almost overdo it with some of these movies about like the hardcore obsessiveness with the more obscure. Like there's a scene where you see everybody watching Phantasm 2, which is my favorite in the series, in a theater. I was trying to remember if that actually went theatrical or not, or if it was direct to video, but you know, lo and behold, it was cool to see that. But it does almost overdo it with the horror references in a lot of these different films that take place in the 80s, and most of them seem like they're being made by people who didn't even like grow up in the 80s. It's these like 20-somethings that just are fascinated with that particular decade, and so they love setting things in it. But yeah, so as I said, that kind of scorned outcast girl, and then you've got the horror girl, and then you've got, you know, the part-time weed dealer girl who's like the, you know, rough around the edges chick. But then you have all of the plastics, you know, mean girls, this wolf pack clique of girls and stuff like that. So the movie starts out about as cliched as can be, and you know, the local school reporter is going around talking about, hey, it's going to be prom night, and showing all these different people. And it doesn't really do much beyond developing the friendship between our lead and her horror-centric friend, who's relatively protective of her, and you know, much more in the face of these girls who pick on her and give her crap all the time. But once the actual prom stuff gets started, that's where the movie actually became a little bit more amusing to me. I mean, bits of dialogue like where the stoner girl, you know, they're trying to see if she's gone missing, or you know, if she's just, you know, like ready to blow off prom and not even try to vie for being the queen bee or whatever. And the guy that she's dating has this funny bit of dialogue where he's like, I haven't seen her in 48 hours. I've been dating this girl for 2 months, so I know her better than anyone else on the planet. And so there's not an abundance of bits of dialogue like that, but there are a few bits. There's another bit with the principal, where they're like, hey, principal, you know, I don't want to spoil it because it's a third act, but there are funny moments, and when it is leaning more so into the humor with the writing as opposed to like the dramatics between the girls, and especially the rivalry, and as I said, you know, in overall thoughts, when it tries to get serious in the third act as opposed to maintaining the lighthearted bits, yeah, didn't really work for me very much. But you know, cast isn't terrible. It's nice to see dude from American Pie and Election and various other things. He was one of those late 90s dudes, Chris Klein, I think his name was. So he's actually playing a dad in this, and then you're just like, oh wow, definitely feeling old. You know, I liked the spunky performance of the horror-obsessed best friend. I thought she was pretty good. Our lead is just kind of vanilla and kind of boring. She doesn't really bring enough of the torturedness to it. She's fawning over this other guy that is dating the main rival girl, the head of the wolf pack. And so I guess don't turn your back on the wolf pack, if I can make the wrestling reference and stuff, because of the fact that, yeah, these girls are just messing with her the whole time. But all of the girls in the clique with their performances are so one note. You've got the, you know, like little lackey who will do anything for her. Then you've got the other one who's like the smarter one and is making sure that the lead plastic girl of the wolf pack is passing all of her classes. Like, yes, this is riddled with cliches and just caricature one note sort of bits, you know, down to, yeah, the heavier weird kid who's like the DJ at the prom and stuff. But you know what, I guess, you know, when there is a lack of burden of expectation, you're just a little more forgiving. And so no real standout performances, in all honesty, but you know, for what it was trying to do, which was like, I think, go after some of those cliches, it wasn't as awful as I think some people are making it out to be. But where this movie really did start to shine was when people started getting killed, because the gore is actually pretty good, you know. And that was the case with 94, at least in the original trilogy. 78 and 1666 don't really stand out to me with any particular kill sequences, but there is one in this that I really liked, and that I especially liked, and it involved a paper cutter and something happening to this character, and you know, it just escalates. And yes, it is very CGI looking gore, and you know, doesn't really look like they were employing much of a combination of practical and CGI, but you know, it was pretty gnarly in its execution, and I did like that. It is very silly with the look of this killer, and I know that it is something Cecil is constantly critical of, and with good reason, because of the fact that, you know, whether it was when we were reviewing Hell of a Summer or just various other things in the last few years, like, it's tough to have a distinctive looking slasher You know, I mean, as you see in the trailers, this person is just like a red cloak kind of thing, and, you know, kind of a generic looking mask, kind of demony looking, you know, grayish, brownish, blackish sort of mask. And so, I don't know, man. It was also kind of silly, the fact in the gore department, characters going around with an axe for a good chunk of it, and we're talking they are just like with ease, and this almost like Looney Tunes cartoonishness to it, just hacking off people's limbs with like one foul swoop of this axe. I mean, shit would have probably dulled up a little bit, but then again, that's me just, you know, over analyzing this in all likelihood. But yeah, I mean, the gore in my estimation was a little more I don't know, a little more gnarly and a little more grisly, although it is played for cartoonish effect, you know, and it was a little more rampant and pervasive than I was expecting. So that, along with when the tone really hit on the goofiness, and with a little bit of the, you know, funny jokes of dialogue that you know, like the one that I mentioned earlier about dating this girl 2 months, stuff like that, you know, there isn't an abundance of it, but when it really hit the tone that I think it was trying to go for, when, you know, it kind of hits its stride in the middle of the film, and that's when I was having the most fun with it, with the cliches of all these dumb characters. Bottom line, you know, and I also mentioned the music. I mean, you have White Wedding, and you've got Hungry Like the Wolf. I mean, no real deep cuts, although it was nice to hear Rockset the Look, because I really dig that song, you know, during this one sequence where the Wolfpack girls are dancing around in these, like, American flag swimsuits or whatever silliness. So, I mean, yeah, but so many of these films, when they're trying to program in this throwback 80s music, they never go for deeper, more interesting stuff, you know? But then again, I guess this was more of a radio-centric era, unless you were a person who was like really into, you know, you had a bunch of old vinyl, or you were starting to buy CDs. Like, you know, there were a lot of people who liked music, but were just casual music people, as opposed to, you know, the deep diver, more hardcore types that I became in high school, you know? So I guess I can't say that that is, you know, unrealistic. But, you know, back to the bottom line that I was about to say as I wrap this whole thing up, is that yeah, the lowered expectations most definitely helped. But another thing for me is that I know this movie isn't really for me, even if they're gonna make it take place in the 80s. You know, I was born in the early 80s, but, you know, I wasn't, like, my formative years, you know, like getting into junior high and high school, experiencing more art and angst and all this other stuff, that took place for me in the 90s, you know? And so a little bit different for me. But yet, as I've seen from a lot of older reviewers that I look up to and consider friends or contemporaries or whatever, a lot of the older reviewers who, like, lived, you know, in the 80s and remember them significantly better than I actually do, they're not digging on this. And that's because, in my estimation, while it is a throwback, these movies aren't made for those people. These movies are made for a much younger audience, despite being R-rated. You know, you can say all you want that when a horror movie is R-rated, that no, it's, you know, it's supposed to be 17 and over and much for blah blah. No. You know, 15, 16, you know, like 12, 13-year-old kids or even younger. And this, especially with the fact that so much of it is rehash of other ideas or just things that feel so familiar, whatever, you know, that's where it's not for the seasoned older horror fans like myself or Cecil or, you know, the aforementioned Drum Dums or, you know, whoever. These movies are not meant for those peeps. These movies are meant to, you know, you're trying to appeal to a much younger generation who just haven't been exposed to so much better horror that did it in a significantly superior fashion, you know, in years of the past. So I'm gonna leave it at that. And while this is definitely not like some big recommend or anything like that, I will actually say temper your expectations. And if you've got, like, with credits, I think it's like 80 minutes before the credits hit, so it's no big form of dedication. And the middle of the film I actually had fun with and thought that it brought enough redeeming qualities to not totally savage this flick, but I'm not going to go so far as to say it's anything great. Not even close to it. It's only sniffing around good at certain parts. So, in any event, peeps, that is going to be the end of this review of Fear Street Prom Queen. So, I've been Jaime and Fuego. I'm on all social media sectors. Sometimes, you know, when I feel like actually veering into the Twitters, Instagrams, you know, Facebooks, YouTubes, Threads, TikTokies, all that stuff. But what's most important is, if you have seen this film, to jump in the comments below, actually give some thoughts. Was it, and am I being too easy on this one? Because there are a lot of times on this channel when either myself solo or, you know, Cecil, like when we were reviewing Until Dawn, people were saying, you guys are going too easy on this one. Well, I'm not part of the super hate culture that is so prevalent on the YouTubes, you know, the angry whatever reviews. So that's just not my shtick. I like to always look at things from as objective of a viewpoint as possible. But yeah, are you more in my camp where you think that there were some redeeming qualities, or was it just total trash? You know, is there any middle ground? Do you have to either love something or hate something? Can't you be, you know, a little more objective? I don't know, but obviously this is my opinion. Yours is yours, and yeah, it's stated in the comments below. Also, like, share the post if you feel inclined, and you've just stumbled upon this video and haven't hit that little subscribe-y thing, please do that as well. So I've been Fuego, and y'all have been Rad Status, and yeah, until next time, Freak fans, for another review, remember, stay scared.